I mean, there is that whole sort of maker movement and 3D printing and all of that stuff, which I think is cool, but I'm just a hands-on guy and I want things to be analog. I really don't want digital technology in my shop with the kids. Like, I want it to be an analog space.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast, our regular discussion with building industry professionals. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by carpenter, woodworker, carpentry instructor, and longtime FHB contributor Kit Camp. You can find the Fine Homebuilding Pro Talk podcast and the original Fine Homebuilding podcast at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Please leave feedback and ask questions there too. Kit, it's such a pleasure to meet you in person and to have you on this show. Thank you so much.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So in decades of working together, or at least a decade, we've never met, right?
No, I don't think so.
Yeah, so this is really cool. This is another cool aspect of the Pro Talk podcast is I get a chance to spend a half an hour talking to folks that in many cases I've corresponded with via email or talked on the phone with for years and years. So how are you doing? Is everything okay in your house and work life with the COVID outbreak?
Yeah, I mean, things are fine. It's been, I'm sure, like many parents out there, interesting to both shift to working at home and have my kids shift to going to school at home. And as someone who teaches a pretty hands-on subject, that's been interesting too. But overall, we feel really lucky to be in the situation we're in this, weird environment that we're in right now. So
can I ask you, as an educator who has kids who are being educated, is it a problem to be teaching your classes when your kids are in their own at home?
Well, no, luckily my kids are older. They're both high school age. So I can't imagine what it's like for parents of
little kids, right?
Preschool, kindergarten age kids trying to work and also manage technology and get their kid to sit still and provide snacks and
are your kids going to school?
That stuff.
Oh yeah, and yeah. Are your kids going to school full time, or is it a kind of a hybrid schedule like many schools are engaging in?
They've been, since last March, they both have been fully remote.
Okay.
So we have not been to school since March of last year.
Are other districts around you changing their schedules, or has that been pretty consistent in your area?
It's been pretty consistent. Oregon had the strictest sort of metrics in the country as far as returning to school in person. That fairly recently changed. So we're sort of at school, we're kind of ramping up for what now seems more likely sort of return to at least a hybrid model of teaching. But the numbers right now are still, even with the new metrics we have in Oregon, the numbers are too high for us to go back anytime sort of immediately. We'll see how that goes.
Other parts of the country, you guys have been dealing with this for a much longer time. Is it wearing on you? Are folks still behaving themselves, shall we say?
Yeah, I think in general they are. I think especially in the dark and rainy Northwest winter, that we're just sort of entering into that. I think it's going to be a challenge to keep people apart and keep them, away from wanting to meet inside. I'm sure this is true everywhere. People are burned out and they're lonely and they miss their friends. The kids miss their friends, and so the challenge is finding ways that we can do that safely, I think. Yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, can you tell me how you became a carpenter? Did you have friends or family members who were in the trades growing up to introduce you to it? Or how'd that go?
It was a fairly roundabout, I guess, way of ending up there. No, my parents are both, had white-collar jobs. My dad is a college professor, just retired after 50 years of teaching, and my mom is a reference librarian. So I grew up in a small town in Iowa, and we lived in a at the time what was already 100-year-old house. So even though my parents both worked not in any kind of trades related job, we worked on the house all the time, and they were the kind of people that, did plumbing and did carpentry and fixed stuff on the house and worked on cars, and we worked in the yard a lot. So I think I had that sort of tendency built into me from a very young age. And then I also we lived adjacent to a 5-acre, what had been a commercial tree nursery, and then had just been let go. And so what was essentially 5 acres of woods as an extension of our backyard. So my brother and I spent a good chunk of our childhood just running around back there with a knife and a hatchet, building forts and sort of doing that kind of thing. So I was always interested in tools. I was always interested in making things. I was a pretty restless kid. Wasn't always happy in school. So being able to do something that was both kinetic and required concentration was good for me. So anytime sort of through high school and in college, when I had a chance to use tools or build things, I tried to take those opportunities. Worked in, like, for example, took a sculpture class in college. I took a lot of art classes. So that, like in my school career, that often meant I was really interested in art. But I was always more interested in the making of it than the final product. So did a sculpture class in college, and then ended up asking if I could do an independent study because I was interested in more sort of less sculpture and more woodworking. And the shop attendant there was highly skilled and helped me out a lot. And then honestly, like, ended up in carpentry because I
had to make a living.
Yeah, like I needed a job. So 2 years out of college, we spent a year in Chicago. My wife had an internship with a dance company, and then we moved to Seattle. And I just could not find it. It was like the first time in my life that I couldn't find a job. And I'd been working since I was 14, during school vacations and summers and stuff. And I just could not find a job. And so in desperation, I called a contractor who a friend of a friend worked for in the summers. His name was Scott Davis, and somehow talked myself into a job with him. And he was a pretty neat guy, and he did sort of general remodeling and that kind of thing in the Seattle area. So started working for him.
I want to ask a couple questions. I didn't want to interrupt you, but so when your parents were working on the house, did they enjoy it, or was it strictly a matter of necessity?
I think both. I mean, because now they're in a very different financial situation than they were when we were kids, and they still work constantly in the yard and on the house and on, they don't work on their cars anymore. That's been a long time, but they have a shop in their garage, and they do some woodworking. My dad makes these cool mobiles, and my mom's built some small furniture pieces, and but they both still enjoy sort of working on the house and working in the yard, especially. They're big gardeners.
It sounds like they're busy, like you were as a person, right? They need to keep moving, right?
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah. And so what kind of undergraduate degree did you end up with where you had all these art classes?
Well, I was an English major and was in a sort of focused creative writing program within the English major. But because I went to a liberal arts school, I was able to take quite a few art classes.
Would you you said you had the shop manager. I forget the title you gave this person, but they were willing to help you out with learn how to use your hand tools. And was it carving? What were you doing mostly?
So I think I was just interested in sort of, I guess, more like the furniture end. So I did this sculpture class, and we were doing assignments that were really art based, but they had this beautiful, well-equipped shop with, table saws and thickness planers and really nice benches. And so the sculpture teacher had his office there, but then there was this man, William, and I can't remember his last name, but he was really the person who maintained all the machines and advised students on, how do I use the radial arm saw? I want to do this thing. Like, how can I do that in wood? So I asked him if he'd be willing to sort of supervise me in this independent study. And I built a little cherry 3-legged stool, which I still have. It was the first time I got stitches because I was trying to chisel the tops of the legs off while holding the stool in my hand. So I like to tell that story to my students. I built a little finger jointed toolbox from some plans I found, I don't know, somewhere. Like that was pre-internet for me. So in some magazine or something. So just exploring, sort of building stuff with tools. I turned a mallet on the lathe that I also still have. So,
did you find that stuff enjoyable? I mean, obviously you did,
yeah.
or you wouldn't have kept doing it. But did it frustrate you at times, or was it joy always?
I was pretty happy in there.
Yeah.
I mean, I've always been interested in tools, and I just really liked the focus of being in there and being able to make things. I got frustrated a few years later when my toolbox all fell apart because I didn't put enough glue. It was all finger joints, and I didn't know at the time like I needed to do glue in all of them. So I think just put a few dots of glue in there and figured, oh yeah, that'll hold together.
And it does for a while, right?
It does for a while. Yeah.
You ended up in Seattle because you needed, and then you took a carpentry job. And what kind of carpentry you were doing, and how long did you do that? And then I think you moved to San Diego, right? At some point there.
There were a few steps in between. Yeah, it was a long journey. So we did when I worked for Scott. The main job I remember was we were out on Mercer Island, and it was a fairly substantial sort of addition and remodel to a pretty funky house. The main thing I remember about that was it was the coldest and rainiest winter that Seattle had in like 10 years.
Like, were you questioning your choice to become a carpenter at that point?
I bet
you were.
Absolutely. Yeah. We were working outside in the snow and just in absolute pouring rain, standing in 2 inches of water using a skill saw. Stuff like that.
People I think sometimes are overly glamorous about what it's like to be a carpenter who's never been a carpenter, and the work has to get done no matter what the weather is. And you guys are in frankly, a bad climate to be building stuff, right?
Yeah, certainly up there, the sort of environmental challenges of it were significant. Yeah. So I think, partly because that work was fairly brutal, it sort of quickly rekindled an interest in, I really like this work. I really like working with my hands. Where can I get more knowledge about? And I started, a friend had given me a subscription to Fine Woodworking as a college graduation present.
Cool.
And so reading the magazine, and I sort of got more interested in hand tool woodworking. And that led me to the Northwest School of Wood and Boat Building, which is in Port Townsend, Washington, which is across Puget Sound from Seattle. So I ended up after about a year of working for Scott, I left and went to the boat school and did a 6-month traditional boat building program there, which a lot of it was boat building, but a significant part of it was just how to use a chisel, how to use a handsaw, how to
read wood, right? How
to read wood, sharpening. It was a really cool program at the time, like no sandpaper, no epoxy. It was almost all hand tools, and then sort of all solid wood. Even the stuff we did with power tools, it was all solid wood. Really a cool program and opportunity.
Do you think those skills translate to being a carpenter?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then from the boat school, I was hired by a company outside of Portland, and we moved down here, and I spent 2 years building pretty big wooden boats down here. I think the biggest way that translates to, I guess, my work as a woodworker now, but also with my students, is a comfort with curves and compound joinery. And just, I guess, having a good eye for curves and just being comfortable working non-rectilinearly, if that's a word.
It's way harder, right, to work non-rectilinearly.
Yeah. But fun, I don't
think it's fun at all.
Trying to get the kids to do that. Yeah. Trying to get the kids to throw, we're so, in her mind so often woodworking means making boxes. So just trying to get them to throw some kind of curve in there, even if it's like a little pull on a lid or something, just to get away from 90-degree corners is fun.
Can you tell me about the transition of becoming a full-time carpenter to becoming a teacher, and how did that come about?
Sure. So there's a couple more steps in there. So I worked at this boatyard for a couple of years. That was an amazing job with a really highly skilled crew. And I was still really interested in learning more about hand tools and sort of furniture making. So after a couple of years there, I ended up going to College of the Redwoods for a year, which is a pretty well-known sort of fine furniture making program. At the time, was still run by James Krenoff, who has since passed away. But so spent
Did you study with him, Kit?
I did, yeah.
What a wonderful thing.
Yeah, it was a real gift to be able to take a year and go down there and be in that program. So did that for a year. That was a super intense experience, partly because it's 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. Also because we had a brand new baby.
Yeah.
At the time we moved down there.
That's the perfect time to do that in your life, Kit.
We moved down there. My oldest daughter, who now is 20, was 6 weeks old when we moved down there. Wow. But it was a great year. And then from there, I actually got my first teaching job, which was in Las Vegas at a K-8 school in Las Vegas.
That was a private school like where you are now?
It was a private school, and I had one of my best friends from college was the science teacher there. At the time, the school was brand new, and we actually went down over our winter break to visit them, and he sort of showed me around the school, and there was this empty room there, and he said, well, this is supposed to be a wood shop. And then through conversation with him and talking to the head of school, who we just met in the hallway when we were walking around, I ended up going back down a month or so later and taught 3 demonstration classes to 3 different age groups of kids, and ended up being hired as a woodworking teacher. And then
outside of your educational experience and your private study, like, did you have any training to be a teacher? How did
No, not at all. It's completely, and I still don't, and that's part of why I feel incredibly lucky to have had these 2 jobs that I've had, which I love. No, teaching for me has been just really intuitive. I always loved working with kids. I did lots of babysitting when I was young, and then when I was both in college and in high school, spent a lot of time with a couple of families that had younger kids, and just was always comfortable with that and enjoyed it. When I left high school, I wanted to be an English teacher. That's what I thought I was going to do. And then at the time when I finished college, I thought I never want to talk about reading a book again for the rest of my life. And so this whole roundabout woodworking, boat building, carpentry thing, somehow looping back to being able to be a teacher was pretty cool.
With your parents both being academics, were they worried about you being able to make a living as a carpenter? Was that ever part of conversations you had with them?
If they had that worry, they kept it to themselves. Another thing I always feel really thankful for is they never questioned what I wanted to do or why I wanted to do it. They were incredibly supportive from the time I expressed interest in going to the boat school. Through carpentry, and then going to College of the Redwoods and moving all over the place. And then, I taught at that school in Las Vegas for 4 years, and then was feeling kind of burned out. And also, we really didn't want to raise our daughters in Las Vegas. And my brother was in San Diego. So then we moved there, and they didn't sort of question me quitting what was a stable,
right,
rewarding and solid paying job, and sort of moving to San Diego.
Your wife, I would add, is pretty freaking supportive too. She followed you all over the place,
absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I was interested in finished carpentry. So we moved to San Diego, and I talked myself into a job there. My brother was there, so we had a connection and sort of reason to move there. But
What I
Yeah.
remember about your move to San Diego is what you told me what it cost to buy what I believe was a mobile home, right? To close to the beach, and it was very expensive.
Oh no, that wasn't me.
Oh, okay, my bad.
No,
But I
no,
bet you'd
that's
agree
okay.
it was very expensive.
Yeah, real estate there was, and we got lucky with our timing. I mean, it was still really expensive, but if we'd gone a few years later, I don't know if we could have bought the house.
On a
Certainly not in the
teacher's,
city.
yeah, as working with your hands or as a teacher, like
Yeah,
it's very hard to buy real estate there. Can you
yeah,
tell me a little bit about the school where you are now and its name and who your students are
sure.
and what their ages are?
The school is called the Catelyn Gable School, and we have just under 800 students total. It's a pre-kindergarten through 12th grade school. Just a progressive private day school.
Are the kids all in the same building, this wide range group, or do they have them broken up a little bit?
We're broken up, and partly that's a purposeful thing, and partly it's the nature of our campus. We have a 60 plus acre campus with both some newer buildings and then some older buildings that were there when they acquired the property. So we're pretty spread out. There's a beginning school building and a lower school building and then a middle school building, and then the high school is sort of spread out among multiple buildings. My shop is underneath what sort of looks like a Quonset hut, but it's an indoor tennis court, and the shop's in the basement underneath.
Why
there.
do they always put the wood shop in the basement? My shop was like that too. What the heck?
Yeah. I got to say, for a basement shop, it's pretty nice because there's windows all along two walls. So get
I think
to
it's
see
noise,
deer
right?
out there sometimes and get good light. We actually get good light for a basement shop.
That's cool.
It's pretty
So
great.
the students are from all grades, or they take carpentry different points in their educational experience?
Well, so there's actually three of us. There's three shop teachers. Every kid from preschool through 7th grade takes wood shop every year. I teach middle and high school shop, and then there's my colleague Rick teaches 1st through 5th grades, and then my colleague Steve teaches pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. So it's part of the art program. So like I said, every student preschool through 7th grade takes it every year. After that, it becomes an elective. So 8th grade students they can choose 3 of 5 sort of art offerings to take. And then in high school, again, it's an elective, and it's part of the many offerings that we offer in the arts.
And how many students of the various grade levels do you have in your class?
So at any given time during the year, I'm teaching about 65 or so students spread among 4 grade levels. So our class sizes are small. So 16 would be my maximum class size, and I teach 4 sections. So
I think I know the answer to my question, but I'm guessing that some of them have absolutely no experience woodworking, and some of them probably have a little. But how do you tailor an educational experience to kids with such varying hand skill levels?
Yeah, it is an interesting part of the job, because I do have kids who've been doing it since they were 4, who have come up sort of through the program at school. And then 6th grade, which is the youngest grade that I teach, is an entry point for a lot of new students coming into the school. So I try and pick projects that are appropriate for sort of both contingents. They tend toward the basic, and then I encourage students with more experience to just sort of up their level of joinery or take on a decorative aspect that maybe the kids who are just learning won't do. Yeah, I guess that would be the answer to that.
Yeah. And do you think that some of them will become carpenters, or do some of them express an interest in being tradespeople?
Not usually. And I mean, partly that also is, it's not really a carpentry program. It's not sort of
learning to build homes.
Right. It's not career oriented or sort of vo-tech as we would have thought of it when I was young. It's really part of the art program. And because we're a tuition charging private school, most of these kids are headed toward,
Higher
sort of
education.
more white collar type careers. I do know, we do have families that are in construction, and there have been students in the past who've ended up being designers and furniture makers. So the school does graduate a lot of people who go into artistic pursuits. I don't know how many carpenters there are, though. Yeah.
It's a hard way to make a living. I'm sure you'd agree.
So I guess one of my hopes for the program is really that the kids they gain an appreciation for this type of work, and I guess handmade objects in general. Because certainly even if these students are never going to be carpenters, they're going to hire carpenters.
Yeah.
And
you can teach them an appreciation for beautiful things too, right?
Absolutely.
I think that's an awesome thing. What are the greatest challenges about being a carpentry instructor at your school? And do you think there are different challenges for teachers elsewhere?
I do. I think our school is a little unique. The biggest challenge for me, just as a teacher, is trying to balance my desire to teach, to sort of have a real woodworking progression. Like, okay, we're going to do sharpening, and then we're going to do rabbet joints, and then we're going to do this thing, and then we're going to do this thing. Is trying to balance that with my also very strong desire for kids to be able to pursue things that they're interested in. So I'm always trying to balance the direction, or sort of what I'm interested in, and what I see as important work with student buy-in, and just wanting to provide a place and tools and materials where they can really explore what they want without me dictating, okay, today everybody's going to do this same thing. So it's always a balance between assigned work and freedom of choice for me. That's my biggest challenge. And that pendulum swings, more one way and then more the other way, depending on the year, the students, sort of what happened in the year before and what I'm thinking. Generally, as the kids get older, I give them more and more freedom of choice. And my hope is by that time, they're comfortable enough in the shop. They know how to use a handsaw, and they know how to use the miter box, and they know how to use the bandsaw, and maybe they've worked on the lathe, that they have a thing in their mind, and they can sort of picture what tools they need in order to go after that idea.
Have you had any of the kids get injured? And has it been a big problem? Because I'm sure it happens.
If my wife were here right now, she would be knocking on all of the wood in the shop.
Maybe I'll do that too, right?
I feel I've been really, I feel I do put an emphasis on safety. And I'm really conscious of that in the shop. I think all shop teachers would agree that there's just an aspect of luck to that. And I've been incredibly lucky over many years, both using power and hand tools. I do a lot of carving with the kids with knives, which, seems simple, but is potentially pretty risky. And then using tools like the bandsaw and a sliding miter saw.
The scary thing about carving tools is, people know to be scared of a table saw, right?
Yeah.
But a carving chisel seems pretty innocuous, but boy, it can really smart when you jam it into your hand, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So I've only ever I've had one student who got stitches over my entire career. That's lots of Band-Aids.
You're doing something right, man.
Yeah. I'm knocking on my bench right now.
Right. On a somewhat related subject, do you have aches and pains related to your time being a carpenter? And do you think we're doing a better job protecting tradespeople now than when you were working in the trenches?
I do think we're doing a better job. Partly, I just think ease of access to information has been a big part of that. I'm talking sort of about over my career, like the sort of development of the internet, and then internet forums as a exchange of information. And those were certainly essential when I got into finished carpentry and didn't really knew all about woodworking, but didn't really know about that trade specifically. I just think there's more information out there about the trades in general, and certainly about best practices and then safety stuff. I think in the US that will always be the availability of that information, and then people's desire to adhere to that or practice safe, work practices is always going to be up against this sort of kind of cowboy aspect that we have in the US in the trades. So I think it's tough, but I do think things have improved. I certainly see a lot more people wearing ear protection and eye protection and knee pads than I did when I was younger. I think for me, I still feel pretty good. I actually feel better the more I work. I went from years of a super active job to then teaching, which is much less active. Although I am on my feet in the shop generally, like I walk around a lot and I'm doing stuff a lot. But the more I work, the better I feel in general.
I totally agree myself too. Yeah. Like if I'm a sloth, I hurt more than if I'm working out.
Yeah. Well, and finished carpentry too is, other than carrying heavy doors, generally I think is one of the easier sub-trades on your body.
It's better than carrying sheets of subfloor, right?
That's for sure. Yeah.
Would you encourage or discourage your kids from taking up a career in the trades if they showed an interest and desire? Do you think there's any reason the parents should be discouraging their kids from doing trade work?
Absolutely not. If my girls were interested, I would totally support them. I would still encourage them to pursue education as well. I think it's good to have your options open. And I just think education in general is only going to make you a better tradesperson. Sort of the more exposure you have to ideas and learning how to synthesize information. I also think anyone going into the trades could only benefit from some business knowledge, which is not something that I had at all. I worked for other contractors for a couple of years and then sort of was looking for more flexibility and more choice of the kind of projects I did and sort of went out on my own, but no idea how to do that. I had no business knowledge at all. And that made things a lot harder on me and my family in those years that I was doing that.
I don't think you're alone in that, man.
I think it's fairly common.
Yeah, totally. I don't think contractors, because they want to look at spreadsheets and do business, but boy, that's the people who are successful at it are paying attention to stuff like that.
Yeah. No, I think it can be a really rewarding career path. If you're the kind of person that likes solving puzzles and likes working with their hands and doesn't want to sit at a desk and, or wants to be their own boss, that's always a thing you can work toward,
Do you ever think about what your life would have been like as an English professor?
No, not really. And I have colleagues and friends who are English teachers, and I always feel really grateful when I go home on a Friday and I don't have a stack of papers to grade. I'm like, so I like that aspect of my job very much. I mean, I do a lot of sharpening and tool maintenance, but I'm not doing a lot of grading. And so
So tell me, how are you doing your job with the present situation? Are you able to teach kids woodworking from remotely? I mean, how's that work?
That's a great question. I sort of decided early on last spring that I wouldn't really try to do woodworking over the internet. I think just realizing the variability in the spaces kids had available to work in from home, and they may or may not have any tools at home. They may or may not.
And you can't watch there to being safe, right? It seems
I can't really, I can see their little faces in a Zoom meeting, but that's about it. So I sort of put that aside in general. Last spring I really let the kids just they had to pick something that they were doing with their hands. It had to be off the computer. They did a little project proposal, and then, so they were sort of working on independent projects most of the spring.
Were you,
That's
were you
sorry.
generally pleased with what they presented and then made?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Although that when I just open things wide open to kids, that also can be unnerving. And not every kid has a burning idea of something they want to make. So this fall, when we came back, I sort of shifted gears a little bit and I decided we would start out with some assigned projects. So I've actually been doing, we've been doing a design and make your own wallet project, which has been really fun. So a little bit of hand sewing, but they've also gone through a pattern development process. So it involves some 3D thinking and how can I best use materials. And I sent home bags of sort of vintage material for them to use and some needles and thread and some card stock for pattern making. And that's been really fun to see sort of what they'll do with that. And then we did a little bookbinding project, sort of simple bookbinding thing. So trying to find projects where I can send all the materials home so everyone is starting from the same place, but then still be touching on some of those skills that I try and develop in the wood shop too, like three-dimensional thinking and planning ahead and also just using your, sort of dexterity and using your hands. It's been really fun to see what they do.
I think that's awesome. And, especially now, kids oftentimes don't have any opportunity to make stuff with their hands. It's so screen driven and they make things in the virtual world, but somehow I don't think that's the same.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, there is that whole sort of maker movement and 3D printing and all of that stuff, which I think is cool, but I'm just a hands-on guy and I want things to be analog. I really don't want digital technology in my shop with the kids. Like I want it to be an analog space because everywhere else in their life and in school, it's all tied in with computers all the time. So
this brings me to my favorite question in this show is, can you tell me about your own house? And do you have any lingering problems you're ignoring, either happily or unhappily?
Well, our current house we bought, this is our third year in this house. It was built in the late 40s. And when we moved in, it was sort of solidly still in a late 40s. Like there was a lot of mustard yellow.
Did you have a pink bathroom kit?
We had a very yellow bathroom. So we've basically been continually remodeling since we moved in. We added 2 bathrooms. Well, turned 1 big bathroom into 2 smaller bathrooms. And then we've been working on the kitchen. So there's a lot of loose ends. From 2 years ago, there's still like a day's worth of work I have to do in our bathroom that I haven't done for 2 years. Because we've been, like it gets functional, and you start using it, and then
you're like, this
I
is
should
fun.
drag a thing in there and paint that little thing, but I haven't. And then I've also been working on this shop, and had a sub panel put in, and I've been wiring the shop. And so
how big is your space?
List.
Yeah, I'm sure. Like, how big is your shop, and would you like it to be different in any way?
Well, it's the nicest, biggest shop that I've ever had.
That's cool.
My previous shop in San Diego was a 1-car garage, which meant I mostly worked outside, and it was for tool storage. It's a really nice space. I'd like to add heat at some point. It gets pretty chilly in the winter. But I did when I put up walls sort of inside and insulated that. So it's getting a little better all the time, but still things to do.
Do your handcrafts involve metalworking too, or are you strictly wood guy?
I would love to do more metalworking. I've done a fair amount of knife making with kids, actually. Some of my high school kids have gotten into that. And we don't really have a forge setup or anything. It's super simple, just tool steel and a propane torch and, grinding on a little belt sander, like very simple. But they learn about tempering and shaping and then adding some handles, and that's been really fun. It's something I'd like to learn more about myself and do more. I've also thought, sometimes I have a little pipe dream about sort of going back to the sort of industrial arts model that we had when I was young of like soldering and bending sheet metal. And, we did a whole plastics unit in my shop class in middle school. That was super cool.
I did that too, like heat forming polycarbonate kind of stuff, right? Yeah, acrylics.
Yeah.
Did you do sand casting? I did some of that.
I didn't ever get to do sand casting. We also did a whole drafting thing, which was absolute torture. I completely
thought
hated
the same.
It.
I still kind of harbor some resentment to my metal shop teacher who made me do like, the lettering for days on end. It just drove me nuts.
Just never had the patience or the precision for that as a middle schooler. It was all just a torture of smudges and yeah.
Kit, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Is there anything you want to ask or tell our listeners why we have you here?
I don't think so. I mean, I'd love to hear from people about either their experience if they're a shop teacher. Always would love to connect with other people teaching woodworking, but also would like to hear about people's experience being woodworking students too. That's always interesting to me and is a great source of information as I think about what to do with my students. So. If
you all send those experiences to the FHB podcast, I'll make sure Kit gets them. That was great, man. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks. That was really fun. I feel like I did all of the talking. But...
That's why we have this show, man. It's because you're way more interesting than I am.
Oh, thanks, man.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have today. Thanks to Kit for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Thanks for listening. Keep craft alive and happy building.